Today we're talking about the ashes of creation, absolute gaming scandal, and the legal nightmare that's come of it, and one of the biggest disasters in gaming history. This is a legal mindset. We teach you to be your own judge. I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney, and this is a Fast Facts video, the quick and dirty version of the latest in legal news. And this is something that came to my attention as I really came into the scope of this, the accounting nightmare and absolute insanity. And from a person who's been corporate counsel, this is a level of absolute corporate degeneracy that needed to be exposed. And also the risks for people investing in this, whether you're a large investor or whether you're just a Kickstarter backer, all of these people were harmed in this scandal. So let's get into that today on the show. First, ashes of creation. So this is the defendant here. Just so you guys understand, this was supposed to be a quote unquote old school sandbox MMO type RPG. In case you haven't heard of it, it had been planned for 9 years since 2016. So obviously the studio, Intrepid Studios, is at the center of this, but the real defendant here, the one who really comes up over and over again, is Mr. Steven Sharif, who is not only creative director, but really the founder, the driving force behind this. And when you look at all the accounting, it points back to this gentleman. And there are many plaintiffs. When you look at the plaintiffs here, you see there are WARN Act lawsuits, which were mass layoffs. That's something I'm going to explain to you guys because the laws regarding that in America are actually very strict. And where they were in California, they're even more strict. And then you've got TFE Game Holdings, Robert Dawson, a massive investor, Legacy Trust with Jason Karamis, unpaid vendors. They were not paying for stuff like Google services, etc. All that had to be paid back. And then one thing I'm really concerned about is backers and crowdfunder class actions, because in my mind, Kickstarter funding and whatnot, it may not be as big, but it shouldn't be treated as less than or shouldn't be treated as second class. And these people shouldn't be forgotten about as people that were harmed as part of this whole debacle. So let's get into it. The opening statements here. The Sandbox MMORPG was developed, announced in 2016. It grew through Kickstarter, primarily hitting $750,000 in 12 hours. So getting a lot of traction very, very quickly, and eventually ending up with over $3 million in funding. So a significant amount of Kickstarter funds in the aggregate. Although, yes, that's less than their total investment amounts. But we have to remember, as we're going to see, a lot of this was really a pyramid of loans based on projected revenue, that was not reported correctly or not being actually donated. And then that used to create larger loans. So there's a whole sort of pyramid that started with Kickstarter. Without that Kickstarter funding, they wouldn't have been able to secure the larger loans and get themselves in this deep. The early access was launched on December 11th, 2025, but the entire studio closed in January 2026, and the game was removed from Steam in February 2nd, 2026. So the real question there is, did the people that bought in get what they paid for? Did they expect the launch to take 9 years and then only last for a couple of months? No, that's not the typical expectation of a gamer, and that's not what you'd expect when you're going to buy a product. So the WARN Act, the mass layoffs, this is a really interesting federal law that I have a lot of experience with, and it deals with the 60-day notice for companies over 100 plus employees. Back during COVID, I was around when we had to issue these type of warnings to all sorts of companies across the United States, and particularly if you're in California, they have an extra special statute that has more requirements and is much more strict. So they laid off 123 employees without proper legal notice. So this signals to me, as someone who has deep experience with this, very big insolvency issues. Typically, you're going to be able to do this. You're going to be able to get around this and deal with this if you've got the money, if you've got the ability to deal with this. Only companies that do not have money and that are truly deeply insolvent are going to run up against WARN Act mass layoff issues, right? That's typically a sign that you don't have the money and you're not doing the budgeting properly. And the cases that are looking into this and the cases that are against this are in several jurisdictions, but they're really seeking 60 days back pay and benefits. There's 2 class actions. One of them's in California. And like I mentioned, California law is not in favor here. So those people are probably going to get a payout there in California. But I want to read you the comments from, once again, Mr. Steven Sharif, because he's a character here who, after these layoffs were happening, tried to draw out a lot of sympathy. And as we're going to see, he's perhaps one that shouldn't be speaking here. But let's read his statement to give it fair dues here and give it some thoughts. So he said, and this is one of his statements he made on Discord, I can make a limited statement in my personal capacity and not on behalf of the company regarding the situation. Control of the company shifted away from me, and the board began directing actions that I could not ethically agree with or carry out. As a result, I chose to resign in protest rather than lend my name and authority to decisions I could not ethically support. Following my resignation, much of the senior leadership team resigned. Following the departures, the board made the decision to issue the WARN Act notices and proceed with a mass layoff. I cannot responsibly speak to further details at this time due to ongoing legal and governance matters. That's some real corporate lawyer speak right there. What I can say is that the developers and staff acted in good faith. That's a word right there. And deserve better than uncertainty they are now facing. I am incredibly dismayed by the situation. I guarantee you he had a lawyer draft this up. I can tell you that right now. This is a definite lawyerly statement talking about limited statements, good faith, right? This is something that is lawyer drafted up. And we can see that when we actually get into the accounting. And credit to Nafaz HQ, who did a lot of the accounting work. And there's a lot of great accounts that have been following this and haven't gotten enough traction on this, because I believe a scandal of this size deserves to be exposed so that everybody knows this is what you can be getting into with these projects you're giving money to and investing in, whether you're investing on Kickstarter or whether you're somebody who has a significant amount of money, like in your pension or your 401k, and you're deciding to direct it towards these things. This was a massive amount. We're talking about $99 million here, right? And once again, this is absolutely an insane amount of money that was really misused. So let's get into the investor lawsuits. So the first lawsuit with TFE lawsuit in Nevada was by Robert Dawson against Sharif and John Moore. It claims embezzlement, commingling of funds, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duties. Those are all very serious claims, and those are all related to essentially when you're having an amount of money that's not directed where it should go, it's being embezzled. You're commingling funds. That means personal funds and business funds, right? Fraudulent misrepresentation. You say you're going to use it for one thing, you're using it for another, and breach of fiduciary duty. You're in charge of those funds and you're misusing them. You have a fiduciary duty to your company, right, and investors to use them in a proper manner. So they go out and say that Sharif withdrew $10 million that just wasn't accounted for, disappeared. He was paying his husband, Mr. Moore, right, John Moore, the former COO, a salary without work. So essentially his husband was not working. So remember back to his statement when he says, hey, the senior leadership resigned. Well, yeah, one of them was your husband who wasn't doing any work, right? Using company funds for a California mansion, definitely not permissible. And then using loans as revenue to secure larger loans. So essentially, they were taking loans based on promised revenue or based on that Kickstarter revenue. Once again, all going back to Kickstarter, taking that Kickstarter revenue, using that to secure a loan, and then counting the loan as revenue, which is not good accounting practice. I'm not an accountant, but I can tell you right now, that's not a good accounting practice, right? To use a loan as revenue to secure a larger loan, right? And that's just a big pyramid of debt that ends up collapsing on you. And then sabotaging the company upon his resignation. So all of these things happened, and this lawsuit was concluded, and TFE foreclosed on Intrepid seizing all its assets and IP. So they did get the assets and IP in this case, and it does show, once again, you've got evidence out there, you've got documents that have been released to show that these things happen. So these documents and evidence are now used by people, such as on YouTube, to expose them, accounting and tax emails, etc. But they can also be used in other class actions, and that's very important here. Next, there was the Yaya legacy lawsuit, which was another large investor, Jason Karamis, against Sharif. And this one's got really the big key points here, pretty much saying that Sharif orchestrated a $140 million fraud scheme by falsifying self-funding when he really gave no money himself. So he had zero personal investment, looking at the QuickBooks and using that as the evidence to say, hey, he's got nothing in here. He was failing to report monthly losses of $2.3 million every month. Think about that. Not putting those losses on the book. That's crazy. Having no board meetings in 9 years. And this is one that I like, how negligent do you have to be to not have a single board meeting in 9 years. That's really how you pull the wool over people's eyes, is you're just not talking about things. You're not having any minutes. You're not doing what a normal corporation would do. You'd have board meetings very regularly. If not, when you're really spinning up, you might even have monthly or bi-monthly, right? If you're really in a building phase. But having none, that's not acceptable. Using Steam revenue for personal gain, bankrupting Intrepid Studios, and rejecting a restructuring. Remember, businesses can more easily go through bankruptcy and restructuring than personal accounts and personal bankruptcy. So it's always possible, even if you're in deep, even if you have a lot of problems, if along the way in this 9-year journey, if Sharif wanted to redirect the company and go elsewhere and try to restructure it or try to get things right, that could have been done. There's points at which in a company you can restructure even a really bad situation, and you can try to go get alternative funding or try to argue different debt rates, etc. That's always possible, but they decided not to do any of that. And this lawsuit is now impending. And now getting to the one thing that I'm kind of passionate about, which is Kickstarter. As somebody who's invested in some Kickstarter stuff in my time, and looking at, what was promised, these are tier lists from one of the Kickstarter campaigns. There were, from what I'm aware, talking to people, there were multiple Kickstarter campaigns, but from one of them, you got the Warrior of Old at 250, Braver Worlds at 500, Leader of Men at 1,000, and all the way up to Avatar of the Phoenix at 10K a pop. And what you're promised here are things that you can use in the game, is getting access to the game and being able to use all these things, have all these things. Look, some of them have lifetime subscriptions, etc. And the way they tried to snake out of this, the way they try to get out of being responsible for this, is saying, we launched the game. Well, was that really a launch? It was more of an early access that you had barely 2 months, under 2 months of access to. I don't really think so. So getting into the Kickstarter claims, which have not been filed, but people are wanting these things to be filed, I think under California law, piercing the corporate veil against Stephen Sharif is very likely to succeed. So there is a possibility for these things to kick off. There's very strong evidence for fraudulent inducement and misrepresentation, which is California Civil Code Section 1572, breach of contract and implied covenant, and unjust enrichment. So for the Kickstarter TOS and the campaign promise, putting those together, saying, hey, you put this on Kickstarter, look at the TOS, look what you have to deliver there, plus your promises during the campaign, that's an enforceable obligation. That's something where you have a obligation to launch the game truly or refund. Really, I mean, to me, that's pretty straight up. And that is one of the strongest claims for people looking to put this together. And then you also can look at early access as not a launch per expectations, especially after a 9-year delay. And looking at the backers giving so much money, 3.27 million, which Sharif misused, he's enriched by that. So he himself personally was enriched by that, some of which he used to secure loans, which he mismanaged or misused, but it has to go back to that original 3.27 million that the game wouldn't have been started without. So backers, if they want to get behind this, which I know a lot of people are talking about this on different platforms right now, they should really document their pledges. They should save all those statements from Sharif and join in a class action. Try to find a class action in California that has very, very, very good law. So let's get to the judgment. There's a very high likelihood of piercing the corporate veil against Stephen Sharif and possibly others, such as his husband, right? You've got possible claims for fraudulent inducement, breach of implied contract, and unjust enrichment for those Kickstarter backers. So I really think they should seriously consider this as a way to fight back. Courts need to offer a remedy for backers and crowdfunders to prevent them from being scammed in the future. Backers, I know what they're giving is small compared to a 401k or a pension fund or a large investor, but they shouldn't be treated as expendable, and they shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens in the law and under the law. They shouldn't have to look and say, okay, well, I've given up this money now. This money is gone. I'm not going to get anything from it. That can be a lot of money to a person. If they gave 250 or 1,000, maybe to them, that was a lot of money. And yes, it's not $99 million, right? But it's something and should be given back to them. And so I do think they should come together and form a lawsuit and look at a remedy here, because this is an unjust thing that happened. And Ashes of Creation is absolutely one of the biggest scams that I've seen in really recent history regarding games. But I want to know what you guys think in the comments below. Have you heard of this? Did you know about it? What do you think about it now? Let me talk to you later. Peace.